Hello and welcome back to Under the Moons. After immersing myself into Outcast A New Beginning for many hours, I think now's a better time than ever to jot my thoughts down into an easily digestible review. First, some context as for my perspective, as I feel it would be somewhat deceiving if I didn't out myself. I've been a huge Outcast fan since 2004 when I first discovered the original game. I instantly fell in love with the world, its characters and so much more. Awaiting the arrival of the sequel has been the source of much of this channel's content, and through this coverage has come a relationship with the developers who have been so open and sharing with the Outcast community. In the past, they've supplied myself with exclusive footage for my videos when covering the original game's 2017 remake, and have then asked for my opinion as a fan about small aspects of this game. They even go out of their way to thank each of us by name in A New Beginning's credits. So my review is from a fan with connections to the developers. However, I don't intend on sugarcoating my thoughts or holding back on less than stellar aspects of A New Beginning. This review is from my perspective only. And just like the lows, the highs aren't going to be fluffed up either. We're going to break up this review into several elements: story, world, characters, gameplay, audio, and end on some extra thoughts. I'll be keeping this review relatively spoiler-free in the grand scheme of it all, so let's get to it. Outcast A New Beginning is a non-linear open-world action-adventure game, just like its predecessor. Yet its story doesn't lean too heavily on Outcast's past, at least not from the get-go. The story begins with our main character, Cutter Slade, being launched into the floor of an old temple in a dense forest on a large continent, surrounded by an ocean, of the alien world Adelpha. His beckoning here is caused by mysterious forces. With a large dose of amnesia, Cutter is accosted by our introduction to the Talan race via Liaz, a warrior who's taken up arms against the alien invaders. Traversing through the tutorial island, we get clued up on the situation. Humans have found their way to this world and have deployed a large-scale invasion with the goal of mining the local rare resource, white Helidium. And we, as the ex-Navy SEAL who's at least remembering his familiarity and warmth towards the Talan, stands and fights against his own kind. Yes, at this point, it's a rather familiar story, and one that would have beaten 2009's Avatar to the punch by several years if the planned original sequel hadn't been cancelled in 2001, as this 2024 version has a foundation made up of that cancelled game. So while the larger narrative setting is somewhat a little less original in this day and age, the wider story shines with your interaction with these inhabitants, as taking on the invaders isn't necessarily a solo mission. Earning the respect of the locals and gaining village talismans all helps towards the greater story. Now, while there are no plot spoilers in this next part, there are narrative pacing spoilers, so if you don't want to know anything like that going in, skip forward maybe a minute or two. For the majority of the runtime, the main story doesn't go out of its way to do anything original or too daring. It lingers in the familiar, which might be the whole game's largest downfall, as deeper into the game some larger narrative shifts are taken, which does breathe a bit of fresh air into the story, yet it all comes a little too late as the endgame arrives like trying to finish an essay an hour before the deadline. All rather rushed and a little jarring for an otherwise well-paced story. It is a shame, as this negative is the last thing that happens in A New Beginning. Yet what's happening plot-wise is perfectly fine and conceptually really interesting, but there's nowhere near enough time to take it in and keep up with what's going on. I found myself sitting through the credits trying to recall all that had just happened in the last hour of the game. It is a shame, all things considered, as the wider world and all these other stories woven in are where the game shines. Throughout the fully explorable world, there are 7 villages you can visit. Each one has been hit hard by this invasion, from interruptions to supply chains, tourism, and even disruptions to Talan rituals, or actually being physically hit hard by the invaders in regards to the education capital of the world, Procreana. Each of these locations has so much care and attention given to them and their inhabitants. They all feel lived in and adapt and expand as you progress with each location's story. Whether that's helping out with giant worms that have imprisoned a whole village, or bringing back long extinct animals that revitalize an ecosystem. The world is full of these side quests and stories that make you hope the content just doesn't end. I adore this aspect of the game, as with each mission would also come some more world building. For instance, I had to run around an animal pen with a specific fruit in my hand, so those same animals would run around and these little pouches on their faces would collect drool. And this drool is a key ingredient to the locals' version of alcohol. There's just so much fun with each new nugget of information you get about the Talan and how they live. And thanks to this aspect of A New Beginning, I didn't finish the game feeling let down by the whole story. The main plot did not ruin it for me. I'm just ready to go back in and chill with the Talan and do all their stories all over again. One element that is usually a game mechanic, and therefore something I would hold off until talking about later, is that of respawning. A part of most games that's just waved off as game logic, nothing to be looked into as more than a fail screen. But with A New Beginning, this respawn is actually a key part of the story. The force that brought you to this world also keeps bringing you back once you die. So each time you do die is a canon part of the story, and this aspect isn't just here for the gameplay, it plays a larger role in that story, and is creatively used to get Cutter out of some situations. And this respawn via spiritual aid is something that maybe is relied on a bit too much in the endgame, as everything gets a little convoluted. And with this respawn, consistency would be key as to how it works. You die, and then appear with some Cutter quip about resurrecting. And this resurrection takes place right after you die. Later on though, there are large time jumps taken after you die to serve the story, to move things forward in the world. The first time this happens, I quite liked it, but that previously mentioned convolutedness stems from this idea too. It's a cheeky narrative device that gets reused a bit too quickly, yet definitely makes Outcast A New Beginning unique in how big of a role the respawn idea works as a game mechanic and narrative trope. I enjoy it, but I wish this time jump inconsistency was, ironically, given a little more time to understand it, as it more or less falls under the Yod's work in mysterious ways, which is slightly unsatisfying. So while the lead narrative of Outcast A New Beginning isn't anything special, the side stories and situations you find yourself in with the Talan are worth it. I don't think I've ever played a game where I felt like I've actually visited a living, breathing world not based on our own. It's also well realised. This too was a giant strength of the original Outcast. So, let's talk about this world outside of the villages, as we're given a decent sized map to explore, and honestly, I don't think I've seen a more beautiful one in all my years. The art direction is astounding, and the care given to each biome of the map is so evident from just looking at the trees. What I love about the world of Ganzar and Sar, the two areas of the map, is how reserved they both are when getting overly creative when designing an alien world. I think for the majority of science fiction, there's this need to show truly alien worlds, something we could never imagine, something that's not found on Earth. And while there are lots of locations in Ganzar and Sar that you still wouldn't find on Earth, its greater landscapes are all reminiscent of our own comforts. Large, expansive green grass, desert dunes and canyon rocks, dense forests and dank wetlands. Yet the assets and elements inside of these locations and how they have all been composed have been crafted to such a masterful level that each view you turn to feels like a picture-perfect landscape. And no, you don't need to reply to this review with pictures of Cutter standing up against rock faces with "nice view" caption. Stop it! You know what I mean? Yeah, this world is beautiful, disgustingly so. A good kind of disgusting. Several of my in-game hours have been spent exploring the world on foot in hopes of coming across little nooks or in-world stuff like tiny shrines or odd camping spots. And yeah, this world is full of stuff to see and do. You will find nooks and camping grounds. You'll even find Talans in very peculiar locations. Sure, I could do with more of it, as there are one or two areas that feel a little empty, but for what we have, it's still delightful every time I come across something. And across this map are purposeful things to come across. Dotted around are enemy bases, from large installments that rank high in difficulty and play a larger part in the main story, to smaller bases, outposts and checkpoints, all inhabited by a collection of human-made robots that can be a lot of fun to go up against. I first expected for these bases to all be a copy and paste kind of deal, but no. Each one seemed to be unique, and also each one seemed to have a function depending on where they were on the map. This was a really nice aspect of it all, as they could have just phoned it in and littered the map with the default bases. And while there isn't anything original about going to bases and shutting them down, I appreciate the additional care given for each one's reason to exist. For instance, one is collecting water from a lake, another seems to be clamping mechanical devices onto nearby trees, gathering its natural resources. Outside of these bases, we have more homegrown locations. Over the landscapes, you'll see red pillars of light which lead to these Gork eruptions. The planet itself seems to be blooming these organic self-defense mechanisms that infect wildlife and turn them rabid. It's again a cool bit of world building, but also the most egregious bit of gameplay added in to give the player more to do in the game. While I didn't hate cleaning the map of them, it was by far my least favourite thing to do across the map. The last two elements are Aurum trails and shrines, which work more or less the same way. One would lead you on an assault course that would test your skills with the movement system of the jetpack, rewarding you with upgrade resources, while the other would see you chasing a spirit sprite across a location and against the clock, leading you to increase your overall health bar. I much prefer these to the Gork eruptions, as it helps you better your skills in the game's unique movement system. And nearer the end of the game, with more skill trees unlocked, chasing the spirit sprites around gets rather intense. Oh no. Both fun welcome additions to the world. Lastly is Anatok's diary, whose pages are spread out all over the world. These were really fun to come across and read, adding to a larger in-world narrative about the bigger picture of the spirits and the past of the planet. However, finding these diaries based on the in-menu clues range from literally spelling out the exact location you could find them to some overly cryptic and sometimes misguided clues. One talked of the diary sitting in a snowy location looking over a crash. In the snowy area of the map are several crash sites of the same enemy dropship asset, and it's located on that one that's crashed into the grass, and the diary just so happens to be on a hill on a snowy peak looking over a large landscape that includes a crashed ship. Again, not a crashed ship in the snow, but the grass. Like, come on man, I just want some clue consistency. Okay, this might be my most fussiest aspect of the whole review. I've also got to give some love to the animals of the world. Almost all of those from the past have made a return. Z-Dogs, Gamors, Krakits, and more friendly ones like the simple Twanha. In addition to this, we have a bunch more bird variety, an assortment of fish, and some extremely creative entries like the Makari, that come with a great bit of lore and features. The Sai that inhabit the temples and would rather jump into a lake than interact with you, and the dorsal cattle-like Bonbars. There's even some roided up horse giraffes and flying stingrays. It's great and gives such a variety and vibrance of life to the world. Yet I still have a nitpick with the Garandars, these massive terrifying worms that badger the villagers of Bidda. Now conceptually, I don't have any problems with them, but it's clear they're an updated version of the same creature from the original cancelled sequel, these snake-looking things. I've always loved this design, and seeing it in motion just made it even more spectacular. So I was a little disappointed to see it change so much, and again, like a few things with this game, its design doesn't feel too original, with the likes of Dune Part 1 and 2 logging in recent entries into the category of alien worms. There are other elements of this creature like the anti-gravity ability that maybe just doesn't seem as realistic when incorporated to the original design, so I'm very much open for understanding these changes. I'm just sad to see that the scary worm snake didn't make an appearance. Maybe we might get lucky in the future. But overall, the world is by far my 10 out of 10 element of this game. I just love spending time in it and still plan on exploring it for a very long time. An amazing job. If we do get treated to DLC, I really hope it's just more stuff added to the world. Let's talk about the people of this world, / those who are visiting it. The vibe of this game and its dialogue is, so very cheesy. It's clear they are going for your late 90s, early 2000s fun sci-fi show. Stargate SG-1 is the main comparison I hear people using when talking about Cutter Slade. and quite the change from his original self. Previously, he starts out like being on an alien world is a big inconvenience to him, and he'd rather not be there talking to the Talan. Yet, over time gets more softer towards them and more in tune with them. With this sequel version, there's a far more friendlier demeanour from the get-go. So, in my opinion, this is definitely not the same character to me. Very different in looks and voice. Sadly, the original voice artist for Cutter didn't return, yet I grew to really like this version. However, sometimes the dialogue would be a little too cheesy, and one aspect was Cutter saying some Earth-based expression which then resulted in the Talan misunderstanding him that would then equal comedy. Yet this is played out over and over again that in the later half of the game I found myself skipping dialogue of Talan misunderstanding Cutter. It got rather tiresome. Speaking of which, the Talan. There are a whole cast of characters who are great fun to talk to. Highlights a duck, the enthusiastic surrogate mother of a giant creature, that one pothead who literally grows blue crystal meth who lives in the most highest house in Disan. There's even a very flamboyant Darasham leader in Polana that just constantly hits on Cutter. I absolutely loved those interactions. There's many more, and some returning characters like Ma, who seems to be very much into revisionist history of the first game's events with a fondness for self-insertion. Great fun. However, there are a lot of times where I feel like the characters of the Talan in general were lost a little. How they spoke and how naturally charismatic they all sounded in the first game hasn't fully made its way into A New Beginning. A lot of the Talan come across as bored, unenthusiastic, and a bit too human sounding. There was this large tendency for them to roll their R's in the past, but the majority pronounce things more simply, without flavour. Now, in this previous game, the Talan are speaking English as opposed to their own language, while in A New Beginning, Cutter is given some power out of the gate that allows him to speak in their language, so we are technically hearing them speak fluently, obviously translated to English for our benefit, so there is some explanation to that, possibly. Sometimes it's clear they just want to have a little fun with accents, like there's this one cattle wrangler that just has a Texan-ish voice.
Took me moons to tame that bastard.
So yeah, it's clearly not an aspect of the world they held on to as much as myself. So I'm probably in the minority. But there were times where I really missed that flavour. Overall, the Talan work really well inside of the game. From helping build a larger world via quests or relations to one another, to just the background cast who go about their day. It's really cool to sit and watch several of them walk around, go sit on a ledge and more casual stuff. There's lots of additional animations you stumble across as you just walk around the villages. Love that sort of attention to detail. And yeah, like previously mentioned, the villages grow and expand in their content as you progress through the story. An example of this is once you've reopened the spiritual center of the world, suddenly you come across so many Talan making a pilgrimage to this site. Really cool. Key Talan players in the wider story like Liaz are great and have a decent amount of depth to them, especially as the story moves forward. The Almael, the two sisters, I think, who speak for the Yods of the world are really interesting and somewhat hilarious how Cutter interacts with them. They are two that make up one, so they always refer to themselves as one entity, and straight away Cutter just keeps badgering them about them actually being two people who are different and think differently. Like the Almael are some long-standing pillars of the Talan spiritual structure. Let it be, Cutter! The humans have already done enough to their world. Absolutely hilarious aspect of it all. As for the other human characters, yeah, it's all serviceable. There is some depth to them, but sadly with the story pace, a lot of them don't get explored enough, or to a degree that would help, like, rationalize the villain's motivations enough. That villain is a little too mustache twirling for 2024. But it all serves the story enough. You just wish there was more to them, as they are a little forgettable. With A New Beginning's gameplay, there are two key elements: movement and combat. Outside of your typical default run, speed and jump, we have access to a jetpack, but not exactly your standard idea of one. With this version, your default jump is replaced with a large boost, which can rack up to 5 boosts overall, which gets you rather high, perfect for climbing around the world's large landscapes. These boosts can also be turned into bounds forwards and backwards, whether that's on the ground or in the air. This also links into quickly dodging oncoming attacks. And like the jump, your sprint has also been upgraded with a jet sprint that sees you hover at a high speed above the ground and water. A little goofy looking, but it works extremely well for zipping across the map. But if you're in the air, you can deploy a wingsuit, which can be assisted by the boost to create some real acceleration. This was my main way of getting around the map in the later part of the game. This movement system is so much fun. The way you adapt to it with each point on the skill tree unlocked means you won't find yourself awkwardly faffing around on the ground or in the air with it. You naturally get used to it. They also include the menu function to invert the y-axis when in flight, which is very important if you find yourself struggling with it. When it comes to combat, these dodges can be turned into a sly tackle to knock most robots off the ground, resulting in hilarious fights. Keeping to the melee side of things, a shield is also included, one that weakens over time via oncoming fire, or using it as a weapon. You can even combine it with the jetpack movement as a battering ram, even more fun now, or as a slam attack which deals a hell of a lot of damage. This combination just results in the most fun I've had battling in recent times. You really find yourself in tune with it when in some high-stake battles. My only gripe with it all, and this is one I've had since I tried the game out in Gamescom in 2022, I wish that the boost jump kicked in after your default jump, as there were a lot of situations while exploring when I just wanted to jump a little bit inside, yet am launched into the ceiling. Or I just want to jump over a little rock, but being sent into the sky feels a little overboard. Maybe this is something they played with and found it to be too faffy, or QA found it annoying having to go through this jump each time and they just wanted to launch off. Maybe having this function turn on when in interiors or something could work. Maybe a quick tap of the jump button would activate this normal jump, and then holding down this jump button would instantly activate the boost. It's something that's bugged me for a long time. You can actually simulate it in-game if you run out of boosts and do a jump before they all charge back. It feels good. But yeah, really fun and engaging movement system that blends into combat extremely well. Beyond that, we have two guns, a pistol and a rifle. For a new beginning, they've introduced a module system, so you can combine several types of fire and buffs together to create some rather unique firepower. I honestly didn't think I'd have much care for this when I saw the trailers, but nope, I found myself tweaking stuff throughout the game and setting on the pistol being some messed up abomination of homing electrical spheres that move slowly but continue to inflict damage when stuck to their target. And a charged up rifle shot that delivers a ridiculous amount of damage, and then, to really rub it in, leave a sticky grenade on the target dealing even more damage. Lots of maniacal exclamations were made using these combos. What a well thought out system, and one that's also visual too, as your gun changes looks with each module. I don't know how long that took to figure out, but it looks amazing. This combination of movement and combat is another really strong aspect of A New Beginning that I can't really fault outside of my own nitpicking. And I would also hope we see a return of it if we're lucky enough for a follow-up. Oh, and ironically, before I forget, we have an additional weapon in the form of Oru's gun. This one is used to fire unique projectiles that all have a link to the flora and fauna of the world that unlock as you complete quests. This comes in handy when you're a little stuck and have multiple enemies ahead of you, from raining down explosives to anti-gravity forces, disabling robots, and more unique entries. These are great fun when you remember they are there to use. It's definitely the biggest aspect of the gameplay that I would forget about. In fact, I wrote this part of the review last because I completely forgot about it. I think there could have been some voice prompts Cutter could spout when your health plummets quickly and your ammo count is low, just to remind you of the additional gun. That reminder would have been helpful in a couple of wild battles I found myself in. I enjoy using it, and gaining and upgrading the gun does have some good tie-ins into the larger story, but if you removed it entirely from the game, I feel like there wouldn't be much difference in the overall experience. It's a fun alien addition to your arsenal that's there to use, but it's not integral to the game. Now, I want to gush about all things audio. Yes, the sound design for this game rocks. The battles have real weight to them, with the energy weapons for you and the robots packing real punches. Hearing blasts whip past your ears is exhilarating amongst the battle. The world sounds alive and matches the visuals perfectly, hearing slight rock tumbles around the snowy mountains and lonely winds across the sand dunes. It's almost an experience in itself, turning down the other audio levels and just going for a stroll. There are some elements that are a little indulgent when in the more dense jungle regions that are filled with animal life in the trees and sky, in an audio sense. As then to look around you, you'd expect to see an alien monkey swinging in the trees, but you're left more so with your imagination doing the work to match the ambience of a location. But I only ever had this problem exploring the jungles. Speaking of animals, they have a great range of expressive sounds. The fan favourite twanhas have been expanded on outside of the range of elk sounds to now a strange synthetic buzzing, like some unique raspy sounding penguin. But it's really made them stand out. So much so you'd find yourself hearing them before you could see them as you come around the side of a rock or dense bush, and you'd know exactly what you were going to see. Lastly, but by no means least, we have the score. The music that accompanies you as you explore, battle, glide, and even race on flying nom-noms. Thankfully, Lenny Moore, which blew us all away with his score to the original Outcast, was able to return. And return he did, while the familiar motifs from Outcast are back and are now more expanded. And we have much more in the way of new themes that are just as diverse in their use, from a new theme being played on emotional strings, but also being perfectly fit for large battles. It's also well thought out and a blast to listen to in and out of the game. A personal favourite of mine is the track Challenges of Tranquility, which first appeared for me as I was starting the long ascent up the Pillars of Desan. Exploring a now derelict route over broken bridges and abandoned houses, it really made the moment special and a key highlight of the whole game. This music is flipping beautiful. I'm putting the volume up, chaps. Each village has its own theme, ranging from peppy tracks for Bidder and Sapper, to more somber yet emotional tracks for Procreana and Polana. Also, that Bitter track has the most insane flute in it. I always imagine a Talan just going to town playing that thing whilst everyone goes about their day. My dream would one day be to listen to these tracks being played live somewhere like the Royal Albert Hall. In comparison to the original score, I've described this one as being more cinematic in scope, while the original Outcast score is more operatic. Yet, A New Beginning's music is so complimentary and respectful of that 1999 score that it's clear they are of the same heart. I feel so lucky we got another amazing score from Lenny Moore that's made this return back to Adelpha all the more enjoyable. And as like the sound design, yeah, you can easily go on a walkabout with just the music turned on and you'll have a great time. So, how the hell do I sum all of that up? Well, it's clear that I had an incredible time playing Outcast: A New Beginning. I enjoyed it so much more than I thought I would. In this day and age, I try and keep my expectations to a point of everything will be just fine. Films, music, shows, games, most things. And while I was clearly excited for this game, there was no hiding that, there is always that worry of, has it been too long? And no, not at all. Yes, A New Beginning definitely feels like it's almost a remake of a game that came from the 2000s, but most of my favourite games come from that era. Fun, cheesy, silly games that don't take themselves too seriously. I massively enjoyed my time with Outcast: A New Beginning. And yeah, I'm now in my 30s, and sadly, my time outside of work has to be shared to a bunch of boring adult stuff. But playing this transported me back to a time where, in the grand scheme of things, I had a lot less to worry about. I was just able to explore the world and enjoy the company of the inhabitants and slide-tackling dumbass robots. My personal ranking for the game is higher than a lot of stuff I've played over the last several years. But this isn't just a review made for me, it's made for all of you. And for that, I can't just brush off the negatives. Yes, we've dived into a lot of them with the likes of the less than stellar story, but other aspects popped up in the form of bugs. Some really unique ones. But they all point towards a giant game that in some areas are held together by duct tape. Throughout the game, I would catch lines of dialogue that didn't line up with what the characters were saying, and Cutter's voice would change all of a sudden. Exactly. Yeah, Gandalf.
I've already found it.
Again, that was not his voice just then. There are elements that feel like they were cut for time or stuff was removed, but the evidence of it lingers. Having finished the whole game and exploring it fully, I still found undiscovered entries for creatures and characters. Quite a lot of them. There's a bunch of painters throughout the map that seem like they were part of a quest or something. The prompt to speak to one of them even appears, yet doesn't work. It feels like a game that was maybe too big in scope for a smaller team like Appeal. But saying that, it's also clear that Appeal is full of talent. So much of this game works so bloody well, and A New Beginning being very much worthy of your time. I think these bugs and oddities do make the larger release price tag a little harder to justify, especially if you're new to the franchise and want to give it a go. I think making sure entry to the series as accessible as possible should be extremely important for this game, and is evident that that was the case with the start of the story. But the price will be too much for a lot of interested folks, as I do believe there are so many people out there that would fall in love with this world. Thankfully, the charm of the original Outcast via the remake still makes for a good entry, but that doesn't negate a lot of the aspects of this game's shortcomings. Now, things like bugs are fixable, and I have no doubt in these problems getting ironed out, as they already have been hard at work stabilizing the game. But to be clear, that isn't affecting my review, as all games should be in a decent playable state on release. I'm just not fooling myself into believing that we can live in a perfect world, and all the blame can be shifted onto one person. It's far more complicated than that. So, my recommendation is, if you're a long-time fan of Outcast, what are you doing? Get this! You're going to really enjoy this one. The longer you leave it, the more spoiler potential. If you're new to the franchise and have played the original game recently, then this is an awesome sequel that builds on many fantastic aspects of the world, with many callbacks to the first game that make this one a satisfying sequel. If you're on the fence about this game, or you've only just learnt about the series and buying a game does come down to how much you can spend, maybe wait a little for the price to come down a bit. But in the meantime, definitely check out the original game. Now, of course, I want this game to do well. I want more Outcast in my life. But I'm not going to lie and push everyone to buy this game, especially if you're not sure about it. But what I will say is that in the last 10 to 15 years, I have lost contact with the AA games out there. A lot of the time I just wait for the AAA games and find myself toting the whole, "Oh, there's no games out there these days" nonsense we hear more and more of. Maybe it comes down from worrying about taking risks with money, or I've just gotten to that age where I believe I know the exact kind of game I like, so why should I try stuff that's not exactly what I've enjoyed in the past? But I think we all do need to take risks on games like this. Our choice in what we buy does go further when we choose to support smaller titles. I've slept on The Outer Wilds and A Journey to the Savage Planet for the longest time just because of this apprehension, and those games are extremely discounted now. All I know is, if I choose to play those games a lot earlier, it will have a bigger impact to the team behind it. And yeah, I'm just one person, but so is a raindrop in a flood. So I think I'm going to make a difference and try and take more risks on the AA games of our modern era. I feel like I might be a little more satisfied if the teams behind them are as passionate as Appeal. So, there we go, my very long review of Outcast: A New Beginning. If you played the game, let me know how you found it. Maybe we disagree on a lot of things, let me know. I just ask for some candor and peace in the comments. I'm a real guy who reads them. It's just me making these videos. And with that, I want to thank you all for watching and hopefully see you next time under the moons. See you later.